Shadows in the Void, Commander. Marcus Reeves stood before the observation window of Outpost Vanguard, watching the swirling colors of the Helix Nebula paint the darkness with streaks of violet and blue. 20 years of military service had taught him to find beauty in the void, even as it taught him that beauty often concealed danger. The outpost was small, barely more than a research station clinging to the edge of charted space, but it was his command, and he took that responsibility seriously. The silence shattered when alarms screamed through the station's corridors. Marcus sprinted toward the command center, his boots hammering against metal floors. Officers scrambled to their stations as screens flooded with data. Energy signatures, massive and unknown, pulsed from deep within the nebula. Something was moving out there, something that shouldn't exist. "Sir, the readings are off the scale," Lieutenant Brennan reported, his voice tight with tension. "Whatever it is, it's enormous, bigger than any ship in our database." Marcus leaned over the display, his jaw tightening. The energy pattern was unlike anything he'd seen in 2 decades of service. It didn't match Kralthar signatures, nor Aquarian, nor any of the known spacefaring species. But there was something familiar buried in the readings, something that made his pulse quicken. "Get me astrophysics. Now." 10 minutes later, Dr. Nora Castellan burst into the command center with the controlled chaos of someone who lived more in theories than protocols. Her dark hair was pulled back hastily, and her eyes shone with the particular intensity that Marcus had learned meant she'd discovered something extraordinary. She'd been assigned to Vanguard 3 months ago, and in that time, she'd proven to be both brilliant and frustratingly stubborn. "Commander, you need to see this," Nora said, bypassing pleasantries as she commandeered the main display. Her fingers flew across the interface, pulling up spectral analysis and energy distribution models. "These readings, they're not alien." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "Explain." "The power signature has human engineering markers buried in it. Fusion cores using Earth-developed catalytic patterns. Shielding that matches theoretical designs from the Prometheus project." She turned to face him, and for a moment, their eyes locked. "Commander, whatever's waking up out there, we built it." The command center fell silent except for the hum of computers. Marcus stared at the readings, his mind racing through classified briefings he'd received years ago. Whispers of secret projects that officially didn't exist. The Prometheus project, the Titan initiative, humanity's hidden answer to a galaxy that had always looked at them as fragile newcomers. "How long until it's fully operational?" Marcus asked quietly. Nora consulted her data. "Based on the power curve, maybe 6 hours. Maybe less. And how long until every empire in this sector detects it?" She met his gaze steadily. "They probably already have." Marcus turned to his communications officer. "Send an encrypted message to Earth Command, Priority Alpha. Tell them the shadow is waking up." As the crew scrambled to execute orders, Marcus found himself standing beside Nora at the observation window. The nebula seemed darker now, more ominous, as if reality itself was holding its breath. Somewhere in those clouds of cosmic dust, something vast was stirring. Something humanity had built in secret, hidden away for decades until the galaxy pushed them too far. "Do you know what it is?" Nora asked softly. "What we built out there." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "A promise that we'd never kneel again." She studied his profile, seeing the weight he carried, the years of watching humanity take scraps while others feasted. "Were you part of it? The project?" "No, but I knew it existed. We all did in some way. Every officer who swore to protect. Earth knew that somewhere, somehow, we were building something that would change everything." He glanced at her, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of the magnitude of this moment. "The question is whether the galaxy is ready for that change. And if they're not, then they'll learn." Marcus turned from the window, his voice steady and certain. "Send word to all outposts in this sector. Increase readiness levels. And Dr. Castellan, I need you to monitor that signature constantly. I want to know the moment anything changes." Nora nodded but hesitated before leaving. "Commander, if this is what I think it is, if we really did build something that can stand against entire fleets, what does that make us?" Marcus looked back at the nebula, at the darkness that was slowly revealing humanity's greatest secret. Survivors, Doctor. It makes us survivors. As Nora returned to her station, Marcus remained at the window. Out there, in the void, the first Titan-class warship was awakening. Colossus Prime, humanity's sword and shield, was stretching its wings after decades of silent sleep. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds and 1,000 ships, alien empires were beginning to understand that the weak species they'd ignored for so long had been hiding its teeth. The balance of power was shifting. The shadows were moving. And nothing would ever be the same. The Council of Fear. The orbital station Zenith Prime hung like a jewel above the neutral world of Tertius, a massive ring of steel and glass where representatives from 100 species gathered to maintain the fragile peace. Today that peace was shattering. Ambassador Theron Kuvaz glided into the emergency council chamber, his sleek amphibious form moving with practiced grace. His skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed his agitation, something the seasoned diplomat rarely allowed. As representative of the Aquarian Dominion, he'd navigated countless crises, but this was different. The human vessel had changed everything. The chamber erupted into chaos as he entered. Insectoid delegates clicked their mandibles in fury. Crystalline beings chimed discordant tones of alarm. The reptilian-saurian compact hissed threats while the machine-linked synthetic collective processed data with cold efficiency. Order. The council arbiter's voice boomed through speakers. Ambassador Kuvaz, your report. Theron's throat sac expanded as he spoke, his voice carrying the resonance of deep waters. The vessel's energy output exceeds our most powerful dreadnoughts by a factor of 12. Our analysts confirm human engineering signatures throughout its design. This is not salvage technology. They built this themselves. The chamber exploded again. Accusations flew like weapons. General Vikram Ashoka entered through the human delegation door, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure in his formal military dress. His dark eyes swept the chamber with the calculation of a man who'd fought in 3 interstellar conflicts. Unlike many human diplomats who appeared nervous in such company, Vikram radiated quiet confidence. General Ashoka, the arbiter intoned. The council demands answers. How long has your species been constructing weapons of this magnitude in secret? Vikram walked to the central platform, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. 73 years. The admission sent shock waves through the assembly. Theron watched the human carefully, noting the deliberate honesty. It was a bold strategy. 73 years ago, Vikram continued, his voice steady, humanity watched the Kralthar enslave the Deneb colonies. We watched the Aquarian Dominion flood 3 worlds to claim their resources. We watched empires rise and fall, each built on the suffering of weaker species. And we understood a simple truth. Mercy is only granted to those strong enough to deny conquest. This is an act of war. A Saurian delegate roared. No, Vikram replied coldly. This is an act of survival. For decades, you've treated humanity as children, as pets, as resources to be managed. You parceled out scraps of space and called it generosity. But we learned from you. We learned that in this galaxy, respect flows from power. Theron found himself nodding almost imperceptibly. The human spoke uncomfortable truths. How many more of these vessels exist? The arbiter demanded. Vikram's expression remained neutral. Enough. The vague answer sent fresh waves of panic through the council. Theron noted how brilliantly the human played on their fears, confirming nothing while implying everything. As the session descended into arguments, Theron caught Vikram's eye. The human held his gaze for a moment, and something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits trapped in a game neither had chosen. When the session finally broke, Theron found himself following Vikram into a private corridor. General, Theron called, his voice modulated to carry only between them. A word. Vikram turned, his hand instinctively near his sidearm before relaxing. Ambassador Kuvaz, I wondered if you'd seek me out. You played them well in there. Fear and uncertainty can be more powerful than weapons. I learned that from studying Aquarian diplomatic tactics, Vikram replied with a slight smile. Your people wrote the manual on negotiating from a position of manufactured strength. Theron's bioluminescent patterns flickered with what might have been amusement. We have more in common than you might think, General. My people were once where yours are now, surrounded by predators, building in secret. And now the Aquarian Dominion controls 17 star systems. Because we made the right alliances at the right time. Theron moved closer, lowering his voice. The Krelthar will move against you. So will the Saurians. Perhaps others. Your ship is impressive, but can it stand against half the galaxy? Vikram studied the alien carefully. Is this a threat or an offer, Ambassador? Neither. An observation. Theron's pattern shifted to deeper blues, a sign of sincerity in Aquarian culture. And perhaps the beginning of a conversation. One that should remain private. Meanwhile, aboard Colossus Prime, Marcus guided Nora through the awakening ship's vast corridors. The vessel was coming alive section by section, lights flickering to life like neurons firing in a massive brain. They'd received orders to prepare for possible combat operations. It's beautiful, Nora whispered, running her hand along a bulkhead. Terrifying but beautiful. Marcus watched her, seeing the wonder in her expression. You helped design some of this, didn't you? Before you were assigned to Vanguard. She glanced at him, surprised. How did you know? The way you move through the ship. Like you know its heart. He stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Why did you leave the project? Because I wanted to see if we'd actually use it. If humanity would have the courage to reveal what we built. Her eyes met his, and in the dim corridor, surrounded by the humming power of humanity's greatest achievement, the space between them felt charged. Were you afraid? When you realized what was happening? Terrified, Marcus admitted, but also proud, and, he hesitated, relieved, that I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. Nora's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Neither will any of us. The moment stretched, intimate despite the enormity of the situation surrounding them. Then the ship's alert system chimed, breaking the spell. Commander, Lieutenant Brennan's voice crackled through Marcus's comm. We're detecting movement. Multiple fleet signatures converging on our position. Marcus and Nora exchanged a look that carried both fear and determination. The galaxy was coming for answers, and humanity would stand ready. Hunters in the dark Captain Zexira of the Kralthar hive stood motionless in the command pit of the battle carrier Devastation, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under harsh red lighting. Her compound eyes processed multiple data streams simultaneously, as her strike force moved through the void toward the human vessel. Around her, dozens of warrior drones worked in perfect synchronization, their minds linked through pheromone networks that made individual thought unnecessary. But Zexira was different. She was a queen candidate, blessed with independent cognition, which made her both valuable and dangerous to the Hive Collective. Human vessel holding position in grid 793, her tactical officer chittered. Minimal crew signatures, defensive systems still initializing. Zexira's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The elders had chosen well in sending her. Where others saw a threat to be destroyed, she saw an opportunity to prove her worth, to earn her own colony world and the right to spawn. The humans had been clever, hiding this weapon for so long, but cleverness meant nothing against overwhelming force. Deploy hunter squadrons. I want that ship crippled before its shields reach full power. Her voice carried the chemical authority that made disobedience impossible for her drones. We strike now, while it's vulnerable. 20 Kralthar fighters, detached from the carrier, their bio-organic hulls pulsing with stored energy. They moved like a swarm of predatory insects, coordinated and lethal. Aboard Colossus Prime, alarms shrieked through every corridor. Multiple hostile contacts, Brennan shouted. Kralthar Hunter Squadron, incoming fast. Marcus was already running toward the bridge, Nora beside him. The skeleton crew of 40 technicians and 20 soldiers had drilled for this scenario, but drilling and reality were different beasts. The Titan was barely operational, its main weapons still offline, shields at 30%. Get those shields. Up! Marcus commanded as he dropped into the captain's chair. Tactical. What's our weapons status? Point defense online, sir. Railguns charging, but won't be ready for 3 minutes. Missile tubes are cold. 3 minutes might as well be 3 hours. The Kralthar fighters opened fire, energy bolts hammering against Colossus Prime's incomplete shields. The massive ship shuddered, and somewhere deep in its hull, systems screamed in protest. Shields holding at 28%, Brennan reported. But they're targeting the power junctions. If they knock those out, they won't. Marcus's voice was steel. Helm emergency rotation. Show them our armored bow. Point defense, free fire authorization. The Titan turned ponderously, its enormous mass defying quick maneuvers. Automated turrets spat streams of tungsten rounds into space, catching two Kralthar fighters in a crossfire that tore them apart. But more came. Always more. "Marcus!" Nora's voice cut through the chaos. She was at an auxiliary console, fingers flying across screens. "I can reroute power from the non-critical life support sections. Give the shields a boost. Do it!" Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and he saw the fierce determination there, the refusal to surrender that mirrored his own. Then she was working, her brilliance translating into salvation, as the shields surged to 43%. Zexira watched her fighters die and felt nothing. Drones were replaceable, but the human ship's resilience was unexpected. Its defensive fire was more accurate than anticipated, its maneuvers more skilled despite its size. "Bring us in," she ordered. "Prepare the plasma lances. We'll tear through their hull directly." The devastation accelerated, its massive weapons charging with stolen starfire. Marcus saw the carrier coming and knew they had seconds before those plasma lances turned Colossus Prime into debris. The railguns weren't ready. The missiles were offline. By every tactical metric, they were dead. But then the ship spoke to him. Not in words, but in feeling, in data that flowed through his neural interface, showing him what the Titan could do if he dared. The main engines weren't meant for combat thrust, but the reactor had enough power for one massive burst. "Helm, on my mark, emergency burn, full reverse thrust." "Sir, that'll tear half our superstructure apart." "Better than being dead." "Do it." The Titan's engines roared to life with fury that should have been impossible. The ship lurched backward with acceleration that sent crew members flying, that made hull plates groan and support beams crack. But it worked. The devastation's plasma lances fired where Colossus Prime had been, bright fury cutting through empty space. Zexira's compound eyes widened in something approaching shock as the human ship vanished from her targeting solutions. And then the Titan's railguns came online. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Fire everything." Twin streams of magnetically accelerated projectiles, each round moving at a fraction of light speed, hammered into the Kralthar carrier. The first salvo shattered its forward shields. The second punched through armor that should have been impenetrable. The third found the plasma capacitors. The devastation died in a bloom of fusion fire that lit up the Helix Nebula like a newborn star. Zexira's last thought, as her body vaporized, was simple wonder. The humans had been hiding this. What else had they hidden? The remaining Kralthar fighters broke and ran, their pheromone network screaming panic without their queen candidate to guide them. On the bridge of Colossus Prime, silence fell. Marcus slowly released the breath he'd been holding, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests. Around him, his crew stared at their screens in disbelief. "Target destroyed." Brennan finally whispered, "All hostiles retreating." Marcus nodded slowly, then looked at Nora. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her hair disheveled, a cut on her forehead from where she'd hit the console during the violent maneuver. Without thinking, he crossed to her, cupping her face gently. "You're hurt." "I'm alive," she breathed. "We're all alive because of you. Because of us." His thumb brushed away blood from her temple. "That power reroute saved us." Around them, the crew tried not to watch as their commander pulled the scientist close, as she melted into his embrace, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief. In that moment, surrounded by the humming power of humanity's triumph, they were just two people who'd stared death in the face and refused to blink. "It's really happening," Nora whispered against his chest. "The galaxy will never underestimate us again." Marcus held her tighter, looking out at the debris field where an Empire strike force had died. "No, they won't. And that means the real battle is just beginning." Bonds across the star's ambassador. Seraphine Kovar stood in the observation lounge of Earth's primary orbital station, watching news feeds from across the galaxy with the practiced calm of a woman who'd spent 30 years in diplomatic service. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made her humanity's most effective negotiator. The feeds showed the same story, the destruction of the Kralthar strike force, told and retold across 1,000 worlds. Some reports were triumphant, others fearful, but all shared one common thread. Everything had changed. Madame Ambassador, her aide interrupted. Secure channel from General Ashoka. Priority encryption. Seraphine activated the holographic display. Vikram's image materialized, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes despite his composed expression. Behind him, the corridors of Zenith Prime bustled with activity. The galaxy is splitting, Vikram said without preamble. The Kralthar want blood. The Saurians are mobilizing their fleets. But others are reaching out, including the Aquarians. Ambassador Kuvaz made contact. Unofficial, carefully worded, but the message was clear. They're interested in dialogue. Seraphine allowed herself a small smile. Theron always was the smartest in any room. What did you tell him? That we're open to conversation. That humanity doesn't seek dominance, but will never accept subjugation again. Vikram leaned forward. But Seraphine, there's something else. We're detecting signals from the Caldera sector. 3 more ships are waking up. Her smile faded. 3 more Titans. The galaxy wasn't ready. Aboard Colossus Prime, Marcus and Nora had found a rare moment of privacy in the observation deck. The ship had been repaired, its systems brought fully online, and now it hung in space like a sentinel, waiting. They stood close together, looking out at the stars. Marcus's arm was around Nora's waist, and she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The casualness of the gesture spoke of intimacy that had grown in the crucible of combat. When this started, Nora said softly, when I first decoded those signals, I never imagined we'd be here. That I'd be here, with you. Marcus pressed a kiss to her temple. Scared? Terrified. And excited, and she turned to face him, her hand sliding up his chest. Alive. More alive than I've ever been. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Nora, when those fighters came at us, all I could think about was keeping you safe. Not just surviving, but making sure you survived. That's dangerous thinking for a commander. I know. His forehead touched hers. But I can't help it. You've become everything. She kissed him then, deep and urgent, pouring months of tension and fear and longing into that contact. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened, as the universe narrowed to just this moment, this connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nora smiled against his lips. We should probably discuss the complications of fraternization regulations. Later, Marcus murmured, kissing her again. Much later. Across the galaxy, in the crystalline towers of the Nexus homeworld, Empress Nixtra observed the unfolding situation with predatory interest. Her form was a striking hybrid of feline grace and reptilian power, covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with her mood. She was ancient by most species standards, and her empire had survived by adapting, by finding opportunities in others' conflicts. The humans have revealed their hand, her chief strategist reported, his own form hunched and submissive before her throne. But they remain vulnerable. Their worlds are exposed, their fleets still inferior in number. Inferior in number, Nixtra repeated, her voice a purr that held danger. But this ship of theirs, this Titan, it destroyed a Kralthar carrier alone. Tell me, strategist, how many of our dreadnoughts would that carrier have destroyed before falling? The strategist hesitated. 3, perhaps 4, Empress. And yet the humans killed it with a single vessel, barely operational. Her tail lashed with excitement. Do you know what that represents? A threat, Empress, an opportunity. She rose from her throne, her movements fluid and mesmerizing. The old powers are scrambling, terrified. The Kralthar want war, the Saurians plot, the Aquarians calculate. But we will offer something different. Alliance, partnership, on equal terms. Her eyes glittered. The humans have proven they can fight. Now let us see if they can negotiate. Meanwhile, in a secure communication room aboard Zenith Prime, Theron Kuvaz sat across from Vikram Ashoka. The meeting was officially listed as a cultural exchange discussion, but both knew better. My people have a saying, Theron began, his bioluminescent patterns pulsing with sincerity. The ocean favors those who swim together. Alone, even the strongest can be dragged under. Vikram studied the Aquarian. You're proposing an alliance. I'm proposing survival. Yours and mine. Theron leaned forward. General, the Kralthar will not stop. Neither will the Saurians. Eventually, they'll form a coalition large enough to overwhelm even your Titans. But if the Aquarian Dominion stood with humanity, why would you risk that? Your people have stayed neutral in every major conflict, because neutrality is a luxury of strength, and our strength is waning. It was a remarkable admission from a being whose culture valued appearing invulnerable. The Kralthar have been encroaching on our borders for years. The Saurians have begun construction of dreadnoughts that outclass our own. We need allies who can match these threats, and in return, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts, and Theron's patterns flickered with something like hope. A chance to reshape the galaxy into something better than this endless cycle of conquest and submission. Vikram was silent for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities. Finally, he extended his hand, a human gesture that Theron had studied. This conversation never happened. But perhaps, in the coming weeks, our governments might discover mutual interests. Theron grasped the hand with two of his own, the first physical contact between their species in a diplomatic context. Perhaps they might. Back on Earth, Seraphine received reports of 3 more signals. 3 more Titans awakening. She stood at her window, looking down at the blue marble that had birthed humanity, and felt the weight of history pressing down. Her comm chimed. It was a message from Marcus aboard Colossus Prime. Additional assets coming online. Ready to defend humanity's interests. Awaiting orders. She drafted her response carefully. Defend but do not provoke. We're building something here, something that might actually last. As she sent the message, Seraphine allowed herself to imagine a future where humanity didn't just survive, but thrived. Where alliances were built on respect rather than fear. Where the Titans were symbols of protection rather than conquest. It was a fragile dream. But for the first time in human history, they had the power to make it real. The new balance. The armada that gathered at the edge of the Helix Nebula was the largest military force assembled in galactic history. 200 warships from 6 different empires, all united by fear and rage. At their head, commanding from the battle fortress Absolute Dominion, Warlord Krexith of the Saurian Compact issued orders with cold precision.